And welcome back to another edition of Transfer Talk. I'm Andy, and joining me today is Tyler from the main panel. We have a lot to go over today, including Tottenham's last 48 hours. We also have a lot to talk about with Arsenal's recent transfer activity, how well they're doing, and how Arteta is managing everything. But first, before we go into that, I want to make sure you guys are following us on all of our social media platforms. You can check out all of our podcasts on Spotify as well as YouTube. So make sure you give us a follow and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And then make sure to follow us on Facebook as well as Instagram just so you don't miss any of the soccer news that comes up. So a lot to talk about today, Tyler. So Tyler, I'll segue this over to you. You want to get us started with some confirmed deals?
Yeah. It's been some pretty active transfers the last couple weeks here. So we singled out a few we want to mention, especially the more recent ones, starting with Martinez to Villa for $24 million, permanent deal, a goalkeeper from Arsenal. You might be familiar with him once Lino went down. He stepped in and played pretty well in the appearances that he made, and now he's going to Aston Villa, and Villa have their keeper. Another one is Sandro Tonali to AC Milan. That's a loan deal, $12 million loan fee with an option to buy for $37 million at the end of the season. That's a pretty important one. He's a really young stud in Italy. A lot of people compare him as the next Pirlo. We'll see about that. So excited to see how he does in Milan. Big news in Everton, James Rodriguez, among others, but James Rodriguez specifically for $37 million over to Everton on a permanent deal, filling that number 10 role and reunited with Carlo Ancelotti. Ollie Watkins, another player for Aston Villa, $35 million permanent deal for him. And lastly, but certainly not least, finally official, Kai Havertz to Chelsea, $95 million. Permanent deal, we know that. Andy, what do you think? What are the ones that stand out to you the most?
Well, when I see Kai Havertz, all I can think is about time. That was a long deal that took place, and I'm glad that it's finally come through. Chelsea now have their man. Wasn't exactly the best opening debut this past weekend, but we obviously know with all the changes that have been occurring in the dressing room, that'll definitely take some time. Which one of those stood out to you the most?
I actually like Martinez to Villa. I think just maybe the fact that both Martinez and Ollie Watkins, I think it's good to see Villa make some moves. I think they needed to. I think they're in a lot of people's bottom three for predictions, and making those moves and keeping Grealish is going to be huge for them moving forward in this season in order to not only stay up, but try to take that next step and maybe move into the mid-table or better. We'll see. But I think those are definitely what I would highlight as good moves for the bottom of the table there. But those are our confirmed transfers, loans, however you want to view it. Be on the lookout for those in the next season. We'll see how those guys do. But in more important news, one of our main topics in the day, we're going to talk Tottenham Hotspur. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the documentary special, but Mourinho is fun to watch behind the scenes. I'm sure, Andy, you may have another comment or two about that. But the big news is this rumor of Gareth Bale going back to Tottenham. What do you think of that, and what do you think of Tottenham in general?
Wow. Well, I mean, honestly, when you first saw the rumors that Bale might go back to Tottenham, I wasn't really sure I believed at the time because, Bale's been linked with so many different clubs for multiple transfer windows for the past couple of years. But it's kind of crazy to see that this one's actually starting to come to fruition a little bit. And it seems like a deal is pretty close to being done. Right before we started recording here, it seems like the deal is just about done. So it's a few pretty popular journalists are reporting that this is about to be finalized. So, I mean, if Bale was going to go anywhere, I feel like Tottenham is the club. I can't see any other clubs wanting to take a risk on him. Just considering he's been, in and out of action for so long. He rarely plays. I know he scored that nice Champions League goal, a couple of years back. So he has had some relevance still. But overall, I have to say I'm pretty surprised that this is happening, but pretty welcomed if from a neutral standpoint. Obviously, Bale coming to the Premier League is not something that I want to hear as a United fan, just because, looking back on what he did for Tottenham back in the day, I have no doubt that he could do that again. So we'll have to wait and see how this one played out. But did you expect Bale to be going back to Tottenham or potentially, let's say?
No. When I think the first time I actually saw that rumor, I think Frankie, one of our other panelists, had sent it to our group chat and was talking about, a swap deal, Bale and Dele Alli. And I was just like, no, that's dumb. That's a stupid rumor. But apparently it's gaining heat, and it definitely has leading up to this podcast recording. Who knows, maybe by the end of it, it's a done deal. I'm not sure about the swap part. I'm not sure what the fee or what the negotiations are. But the idea of Bale coming back to Tottenham is enticing. I think Bale going anywhere other than Real Madrid is something that we've talked about as being needed. I hate seeing him. He's such a talent, and he's being kind of wasted out there. And he was, he had a few prime years in Madrid. He was really good for Tottenham back in the day. I know, obviously, Mourinho being there is a little bit of a different system, and there's some other forwards to have to compete with. I don't know how hard he's been practicing. I don't know how, it's been a while since he's been at that game pace in the Premier League. And there's other players like Bergwijn, Lucas Moura, Son. Like there's some solid players that have talent in that Tottenham roster. I don't know that he's going to come in and start right away, but if he can come in, get to practicing, get into the system, and get back to somewhat of his old self, he's going to be a huge impact for them moving forward. Playing on the opposite side of Son or next to Kane, however they want to do it, that automatically becomes a more potent attack than it already is.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this deal is that it's kind of how it came to be. We'll talk about Sergio Reguilón a little bit later on in this topic. But to my understanding, it seems like when they were doing negotiations for Reguilón, Daniel Levy just flat out asked, and what about Gareth Bale? And that kind of just sparked this whole thing and this interest that, Real Madrid are finding themselves in a position where they might be able to actually offload Bale. And another thing that's interesting about this is that United kind of paved the way for this deal to kind of for people to get creative to make this deal happen, because when we loaned out Alexis Sanchez to Inter Milan, we did that loan deal, but we were still paying a portion of his wages. And that was really one of the first times we've seen that happen with a big deal. And now it's being reported that right now Tottenham and Real Madrid are negotiating in terms of what the percentage of the wages will be. But I don't think that would have been an option or something that Real Madrid might have considered until they saw how much money United would save on Alexis Sanchez, for example. So I think this works out great for everybody. Real Madrid can finally, they can get him off of their wage bill for at least a year on this pretty expensive wage bill. They might be paying a portion of it still. But then Bale also gets the playing time that we weren't exactly sure if he wanted, but it seems like in recent interviews that he does want to play again, and he has been trying to push for a leave outside the club. So all in all, I think this is a good deal if it can happen. I think this is an opportunity that Bale desperately needs. But I guess my question to you is, do you think Gareth Bale is the answer considering Tottenham's defensive drawbacks?
No, I don't. I think if you were to play Bale, Son, Kane up top with Dele Alli in behind and have a little bit more of an attacking, tactical situation there, I think that could work. But under Mourinho, I'm not sure that Bale is the answer. He's not exactly the hardest defensive work doesn't come to mind, and I don't mean that as in a downplay on Gareth Bale. But sometimes guys like Lucas Moura who play that right side position can get back a little bit more. That's what Mourinho is looking for. That's a reason why Dele Alli hasn't been in the starting lineup as much, is because there's other guys there that play, the entire length of the field, play a little bit more box to box and have a defensive minded focus. That being said, under Mourinho's system, I think their money could be spent elsewhere with the way that their defense is aging and has a few holes in it, to be honest with you. I think, we talk about Koulibaly all the time on this, but I think, a guy like Jose Jimenez is another one that's a center back on the market. Or just in general, beefing up that defense, in my opinion, would be where I think is the best return on investment. But if you have an opportunity to bring Gareth Bale out of a situation, he's going to be a player with a chip on his shoulder. It's a place he's familiar with and played at before. I think it's worth inquiring about. And like you said, I don't know that they even expected it to become this much of a serious inclination. But apparently it has, and if they have the opportunity, they might as well make the most of it.
Do you think this puts pressure on Harry Kane a little bit, just because Harry Kane hasn't been scoring goals as much? With under Mourinho's system, it's a little bit hard for players like Son and Lucas to get in goal-scoring positions just based on how their defensive shape is and how they transition into the offense. But do you think this deal is going to put some pressure on Harry Kane, or do you think this is more so to give a little bit of competition for the wingers that are currently on the team that haven't exactly played as well in recent weeks?
Yeah, I don't think it's so much pressure on Kane as it is just more of an opportunistic move. But I think Kane is still the focal point in Tottenham. I think he always will be. And, I think that they have full faith and belief in him. And if you have guys like Son and Gareth Bale on the two sides of you supplying, then yeah, I could see the fact that there's no excuse not to score goals. But I don't think it really affects Kane too much. I think if anything, he'd be happy and welcome to have Gareth Bale back at Tottenham.
Yeah, I agree. And, you mentioned how Kane still is going to be the focal point. It's going to be interesting to see Bale, not the icon of Tottenham, because when you think of Gareth Bale's time at Tottenham, he was the icon. He was the go-to guy. He was feed the ball to Gareth Bale. Now it's under Jose Mourinho, where they're playing a lot more of a defensive style and a little bit less freedom, you would say, in the attacking third, which is something that Bale has needed. But I think what's going to be exciting about Bale, and something that's not exactly being done with the current players on the wing position, is that Son is a cut in and shoot kind of guy. He doesn't really cross the ball a ton. Lucas Moura is more of a hybrid between both. So I would definitely say he's a little bit more of a crosser than that, but Bale is a goal scorer. And when he's at his best, Bale is a goal scorer, and he's very good at distributing balls from the wing into Kane. And I feel like that's kind of where Kane's strong suit is that he's a good target man. You need to get him the ball. He's not the best at penetrating the defense and winning on speed. So you got to kind of get creative in terms of giving him service. So I think if anything, that's what's going to be the most exciting thing about Bale. And I think that there's tons of potential for him just in that regard.
Yeah, and I think too, we always touch on it every episode, but it's a good time to talk about depth, right? I think going into this season, it is different and weird as it has been, and now playing all the way through. All these teams are going to have depth. And you look at Tottenham last season, when Harry Kane went down, a lot of their goal production went down too. And if something like that were to happen again, someone like Gareth Bale is a player of the talent and capability to be able to put the team on his back and bring them forward in place of something like that. Now, again, I haven't seen him play a full-paced game at a Premier League level in quite some time. So I do think it'll take some time for him to get there and get used to the new teammates and things if this goes through and new system. But I think it's an opportunity that sounds to me like it was worth inquiring about and could work out for them moving forward. Now, if only they could bring back Modric too, right?
Oh, man, that would be a legendary bring back with having Harry Kane, Modric, and Bale. That's like a Tottenham high school reunion, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that's exciting. But, we talked a little bit now about their offense, and now we'll kind of dig into the Sergio Reguilon deal. It looked like he was going to be a United player, and then all of a sudden, as Man U are trying to negotiate with Real Madrid, Tottenham accepted both of the clauses and submitted a 30 million pound bid, which I believe equates to about 35 million US. And now it looks like he's going to be joining Tottenham. What are your thoughts on Reguilon joining Tottenham?
Well, we talked about defense being an area they wanted to work on. I think that's exactly what this is. I don't know. I mean, I guess for those of us that don't know, what exactly are the details of what happened with the United thing? I think we should touch on that a little bit too, which we will in a second. But my first initial reaction is I think it's good. I think it's good for Tottenham, to not only be able to kind of do that to one of your rivals, but to bring in a player of the caliber that Reguilon is in an area that I do feel like is a need for Tottenham. I think that's a huge deal. We didn't talk much either about Højbjerg. I think in general that's another guy that they brought in. So my point there is they're making moves. They know where they're weak. They're addressing it some way. And if they can bring Bale in as a bonus, we just talked about that. But I think from a United perspective too, Andy, I want to hear your thoughts on how you feel about Reguilon, and then just some details on what exactly has been transpired through all of this for those that don't know exactly what's going on.
Yeah, of course. So United made contact with Real Madrid about Reguilon a couple of weeks ago, and Real Madrid have been very firm in their stance that they want 30 million. They want 30 million euros for the player, and they also want a buyback clause. And then there's also a La Liga clause that's pretty common with La Liga teams, to where it's a match bid clause essentially. So United, when United invest in a player, they were very firm in their stance that they did not want either of those clauses, because they felt that if they're going to bid for a player, they want him to be a Manchester United player, and they don't want a buyback clause, where the player can potentially go back in 1 to 2 years, as long as that clause is still active. So from a United standpoint, that's where the division was. United always had agreed terms with Reguilon for weeks now. So it's just a matter of what the final tag was and whether they can negotiate the final terms of the deal. And it looked like they were making a little bit of headway. United were still firm on they were not going to spend the 30 million euros, and they were negotiating both of those clauses. So United were in a battle where they had terms agreed with the player, but they were still working on the deal with the club. And then 48 hours ago, you have Tottenham, who came in and they agreed to both of those terms. They also submitted a $30 million bid, and Real Madrid accepted. And then it kind of fell onto Tottenham were essentially in the other boat where they had a deal agreed with the club, but they had to work with the player. And what ended up happening was, I guess it was late last night, Jose Mourinho had to do a little bit of convincing with Reguilon because, Tottenham isn't really qualified for European football at this time. So, and Reguilon definitely wanted to play that. So it took a little bit of convincing because, he was pretty set on joining United. He wanted to join United, and United was excited for him to come too. But ultimately, they were able to convince him, and he's about to sign that deal. And now he's on his way to Tottenham. And it looks like it was mostly just due to United not wanting that buyback clause and not wanting to meet the demands, which, I understand Manchester United's position. Sad we won't be getting him, but Reguilon's a fantastic player, and he'll do very well at Tottenham.
Yeah, he's left back, right?
Correct. Left back, left-footed. And I think that's exactly what they need. And, he's a pretty good defensive back from a defensive standpoint, but I think where Tottenham's really going to see the value in him is his ability to go forward. He was fantastic for Sevilla when it came to running the left wing back side, running up and down the field, covering both ends, providing great service. So I think his offensive capabilities is what Jose Mourinho desperately needs in that squad, especially with a little bit of pace to complement Son on that left side. So yep. I'm really excited for Reguilon. I think this is a perfect signing for them. Definitely someone that they needed. I'm sad United won't be getting him, but, another United deal falling through the cracks. But all in all, you have to say Jose Mourinho handled this perfectly. He was very hands-on in the deal from what I've heard.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's important that you mentioned the connection between him and Son and having some pace out there and being able to help defensively as well. Because Tottenham, obviously not being in Europe is not where they want to be. And he seems to me like it's going to be a key piece to bringing them to Europe. And that's probably what Mourinho sold him on, is that he'll be back in the European football very soon, but they're going to have to earn it. And I think that they will this year. We haven't come out with our official Premier League predictions. Maybe this weekend or next, we'll see. But I do think Tottenham will be up there. And
so real quick before we
go ahead.
Yeah, and before we segue over to our next main topic, I do want to ask you, kind of leave this with one final question. So, we mentioned Gareth Bale's coming, so you help him on the offense. Reguilon coming in at left back, looks like that deal is pretty much certain at this point, just a matter of medicals and all that. Do you think that this is going to change where you might position Tottenham on your rankings? Do you happen to think that this is going to drastically improve the team, or do you still think that there are holes that will keep him at the level that you would place him on the league?
So I'll be honest, in my preliminary rankings, I had them pretty high up there compared to what I feel like most other people did initially. And I think that for me, it doesn't change where I have them, but it validates my argument for having them up there. I think that, I feel like last year with where they fell was a little bit more of a fluke than people think. I do think that they're a solid team and they've got solid backing. And if you look in the past, aside from this weird year, past few seasons before that, they've consistently been in the top four. So I think that they're going to be in the fight, not for the title, but for Champions League and Europa for sure. And I had them in there, and I think it doesn't change that for me, but it validates it.
Yeah, I think that's a key miss. I think that's a key piece. I had Tottenham finishing 7th, and I think I'm still going to stick with that. I think that with the buyback option being in place for Reguilon, if Tottenham aren't doing well, I just have a feeling Real Madrid will just scoop him back up. So I think for Reguilon, it's a perfect fit for him and in that essence. But in terms of Tottenham, I think that this doesn't really change my positioning of them too much, because I think ultimately what the issues that are going on with Tottenham and why they haven't been gelling as well since the restarts, I just don't think that Mourinho's system is the type of football that Tottenham want to play. And I think that, looking at Man United and how they were with Jose Mourinho too, you could just feel that friction within the dressing room. I still think that's kind of present today. I still have to actually finish the documentary, but I'm really excited to finish that. We're about to get to the coronavirus part. But anyway, I don't think this will change my position for Tottenham, but I am excited to see where they're able to move on from this, because these are great deals. Bale is a little bit more of a risk in the sense that, we haven't seen him play too much regular football, but I think if the pieces end up lining pretty well for them, I think that this could maybe elevate them to potentially a Europa spot, but I don't think it'll get too much higher from that, in my opinion, just because Kane has been out of form, and it just doesn't seem like the players are enjoying that type of football at the moment. But anyway, we will segue that over into our next topic. We're going to go to the other side of London, and we're going to go to Arsenal and talk about quite a few things that happened there. But the big headliner, this deal has probably been talked about for months now, and it's definitely been talked about since the end of the season. But looks like Aubameyang officially extended his contract. He is staying at Arsenal. There were a couple other clubs that were in the running to potentially sign him and that made a couple offers, but ultimately he rejected those, and he is going to be sticking to Arsenal. How huge is this for Arsenal, Tyler?
That's important, man. That's a huge statement for Arsenal. I know, teams like Barcelona were interested in him. He's a player of the caliber that can pretty much go anywhere. And for him to stand strong and have the stance that, yes, I want to stay, I want to be here, I want to, this is my team, Arsenal is where I want to be and be there for the future, that's a huge statement. And I think that is going to have somewhat of a domino effect. I know I'm going to bring in a little bit of a hockey knowledge here to compare. I know maybe not all of our audience enjoys hockey, but the point is still to be made. Obviously, I'm a huge Tampa Bay Lightning fan. I'm wearing the shirt for those of you that don't know. And a few years ago, their captain, Steven Stamkos, had taken an extension deal and he had actually taken a little bit lower money than he thought he deserved. But he, instead of going to a big star-studded team, his hometown team in Toronto, he stayed in Tampa. And what that did was the next three best players on that squad also took the same type of deal where they extended for longer years at a little bit less of money to keep the core team together. And now they're currently in the conference finals battling for a potential championship. The direct bridge that I want to use to draw over to that is at Arsenal, they're kind of in a situation where we didn't know what was going on in their locker room. And they've gone from all these, Guendouzi attitude problems, and they're in shambles, and we don't know what's going on, to, something like Aubameyang extending his contract and making the statement that he wants to be here for the long term. Whether that has a domino effect or not, it's going to have an effect on that locker room. And I think that's the direct analogy that I have. I think it's an overall positive move for the locker room. I think it's something that they need in terms of stability and moving forward. And with him and Arteta kind of locked in to put things together for the future, I think it's great news if you're an Arsenal fan, and I'm excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, and kudos to Arteta. I mean, the moment he came back, or the moment he joined Arsenal, the first thing on his mind was we need to extend Aubameyang. I mean, that's kind of like how I felt a little bit about the Pogba situation last year, where it's like, if we were to lose Pogba, like, you lose a big icon at a club, and that takes away from your marketing ability as well. So that was kind of the way I looked at it for Aubameyang, and he's obviously a quality player. He's done well for Arsenal, continues to do well for Arsenal. I think if you're going to give anyone that type of money, he's definitely the player to do it, because stand-up guy, he's definitely the face of the club, and it's definitely someone that they needed to keep long-term. So now that, we've digressed a little bit and talked about Aubameyang, but there's still a couple other transfers that they're looking to make, a couple people that they're looking to offload. And I know that we've seen quite a few links to OR, for example, from Lyon. I know that he's been a very highly viewed talent, and Arteta seems pretty keen to get him. Where do you see OR fitting into the squad? Do you think he'd be an immediate starter? Do you think that they should go for him, for example, maybe over Thomas Partey, or do you think Thomas Partey should be the priority target for Arsenal? Kind of a loaded question.
I think OR should be the priority. I think so. An important key piece to know is they also just locked up Ceballos. That's a huge deal for their midfield too, and he's a guy that can play box to box. And or to me is more of a playmaking, number 10 attacking midfield type of player. When I watched him play even against Bayern Munich this year, I mean he is very impressive and was a main distributor on that team. And I think he could come in directly into Arsenal and play that role. It wasn't too many. I think it was a few months ago, to be honest. We had brought up Arsenal on this podcast, or maybe a weekend one. And I had talked about a player of the caliber of the style of maybe a Coutinho or James Rodriguez being the missing piece for Arsenal. Well, or is exactly that, and if not better in terms of potential and youth. And I think he comes in and fits perfectly right away. I think he can really be the distribution between the midfield and the forwards. You already have a very solid front three or front four, whatever way that they set up their formation. I think adding Or in between that and the likes of Ceballos and Xhaka or whoever starts in the midfield, I think is a very, very important priority. I personally would prioritize him over Thomas Partey, but regardless of which direction
really
they
have
go,
the best spell at Atletico.
No, and regardless of which direction they go, they got to sell players. So I'm not huge on Partey, just simply because Atletico has such a unique system. Not everyone that plays in Atletico gets transferred somewhere else and is a star. And I just think Or is a better player in general anyways, and more of a better fit for Arsenal. What about you?
I agree. Definitely think OR is definitely the better fit. I mean, they already signed Willian. They have Saka. They have Martinelli. They have Aubameyang. They have so many wingers. So I feel like at this
Pepe.
point, yeah, Pepe. Oh my gosh, Pepe. I forgot Pepe too. So they just have so many wingers. So I just don't think that they need to take a gamble on someone like Partey, who I don't think had that great of a season at Atletico Madrid. And the price tag that they're putting on him is 50 million euros. And I believe that's just a little too much for a player of his quality. So I think that OR, if you're definitely going to spend that type of money, I think right now they're viewing his price tag at 60 million euros. So somewhere between like 66, maybe 67 US. And I think that you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck. Like you said before, he's a playmaker. He's a good attacking player. But I think the biggest thing is that he's a distributor and he reads the game very, very well.
Yeah.
He's just got that vision in the midfield to where he can play a long ball, he can play a short ball. And I think that they just need a little bit more creativity in that Arsenal team. You talk about their starting lineup. You have Lacazette up top. You have Aubameyang on the left, probably Pepe on the right, maybe Willian as well, who's a playmaker. And the one thing I will say too about Willian real quick is anyone watched him this past weekend, he had 2 assists and he was a hugely needed element to that Arsenal team, just in terms of the creativity and the chance creation aspect. So for that, it just shows that all really Arsenal need is a little bit of creativity. But going back to what I was saying before, they have. Go ahead.
Well, I think Willian can play the role that OR would come and fit into, but Willian's not the long-term solution, right? And a guy like OR could be, because like you said, you've got Lacazette, you've got Pepe, you've got Willian, you've got Aubameyang. You add OR to the mix, it starts to get a little bit ridiculous in terms of their attack. And then with Ceballos and Xhaka in the midfield too. I think it's an important move, but they've got to sell players, right? I mentioned Guendouzi. That's obviously an awkward situation. Even guys like Torreira, they've got to find the way to make the money work. They've got to find the financial path to either or Partey to make it work. And I'm not sure who the best players would be to sell. The first 2 that come to mind for me were Guendouzi and Torreira. But I don't know if you have more on that or any other points that you want to make there too. But I think it's an interesting situation there at Arsenal, but all positive.
And they have good players there. I mean, they have good rotational youth talent as well in Saka and Martinelli to play on that left side. And, Aubameyang can play up top. He can play left. So, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility with that team. Same thing with Willian, like you mentioned before. He can play right wing. He can play cam, that number 10 role. So a lot of flexibility in that team. And I think that's good. And they have a very good foundation. Arteta's done very well this summer window. Another player that I don't think you mentioned before that they could offload, and he's been linked to PSG, is Hector Bellerin as well. I know that's been a heavy link to them, so that could be another person that they offload. So, Arsenal still have a little bit of financial liquidity that they can find in the players that they're trying to offload. I think Torreira would probably just be a loan at this point. I don't know if they're ready to sell him yet. Still a good player. I don't know if I would want to.
And I don't know too. I know they were trying to shop around Guendouzi like for a swap deal. I don't know if Lyon was one of those teams that they talked to, but I think that would be an interesting, at least attempt at a selling point, considering he's French and or is coming from the French side. That way Lyon could get something in return there other than just cash. I'm not sure what's on the negotiating table, but I'm going to ask you kind of the same thing that you asked me about Tottenham with these potential changes, right? And the difference in the effect of the Aubameyang extension and the potential change of someone like or Partey coming in, and the lockup of Ceballos and the development of guys like you said, and Martinelli and Saka. I mean, with all of that in Arsenal's situation, would you move them up on your prediction sheet, or where do you feel like they're going to be in terms of a general area at the end of the season?
I wouldn't move them up solely just because I'm not going to put United below the bottom 4. Just not going to happen. Sorry. And then I just have a feeling Chelsea is going to secure that last spot. So I just don't see them. I have them ranked 5th. Just spoiler alert. I have them ranked as 5th. So I don't think there's too much room for them to move up from there. But I think that they could very well earn a top 4 spot. I mean, Arteta has set the foundation for a great culture at Arsenal. He's completely changed the dressing room and how they feel. He's made great additions, having his new additions also score with Gabriel. I think that Arsenal is heading in the right direction. And then also with them locking up Aubameyang and the way that they rolled it out in terms of revealing that he was extended, the timing of it is just you could just tell that Arsenal are rallying behind Arteta, and that alone in itself is making me push them up a little higher in terms of how I will regard them. So I do think that the pieces are starting to finally come together for Arsenal. It's kind of scary as a United fan, but in terms of competing for European competition, I think that this is setting a stage for a very crazy season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I think a lot of Premier League teams are moving in the right direction. That top four is going to be really, really tough this year. Really, really tough. Can't wait to see what happens.
It's insane. And ultimately, and while we're still talking about just how the Premier League will finish out and who's going to earn a European spot, I think it's going to come down to which team can survive the injury bug the most.
Yeah.
Whichever, because I mean, if you look at Liverpool last season, Liverpool didn't have a ton of injuries with their main three, and they were able to play a good portion of the games, and they did well. City got hit with quite a few injuries. And then the rest of the teams also had a couple injuries, but I think it's going to boil down to which team can stay the healthiest.
I agree with you there. And it just ties back to what we talk about every time we get together is that depth and how important it is going to be going through this season. And I think that's going to be a very important piece to it. But, those are just some good topics. But my favorite section is Flop or Flourish, man. What do we got this week?
Oh, we got some interesting stuff. We got a little bit of Premier League, and then we got a deal that's apparently confirmed that we'll talk about at the end of the show, and we'll probably give a little bit of a take on this one because I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But first, we'll start off with the Callum Wilson and Ryan Fraser leaving Bournemouth, relegated side Bournemouth, in order to join Newcastle. How do you think these two former Bournemouth strikers are going to prove to be a Newcastle side?
I think it's going to be interesting, right? When I hate to keep talking about the subject of our predictions, I actually I'm not going to spoil. I was thinking about putting Newcastle in the relegation thing, and I'm like, well, crap, they got Wilson and Fraser. That might be a pretty good flourish for them. Now I don't know what to do. I think it's good. I think it's good for all parties involved. As a player, you want to be at the top. You don't want to be in relegated, and to have both of these guys, we've seen them have success at Bournemouth. Bournemouth had a rough spell last season, but moving into a squad like Newcastle, I think it's good, especially for them, but also for the club, because I think there was a lot of I don't know what the word is. I don't want us to call it negativity, but a little bit of deflation when the financial situation didn't quite happen. There was no buyout for them, and so a lot of the fans, organization, players, I think that they're kind of looking forward to some of that. And bringing in the duo of Wilson and Fraser, I think, is a little bit of a positive spell in all of that deflation, a little bit of air to the tire, so to speak. And I think it's good for them. I'd go Flourish on that for sure.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with you on that one. The one thing I want to point out with those two coming in is, that we both know that they are good goal scorers. They're great additions to the team. They are team players. They did well at Bournemouth, but in a relegated side, it just doesn't ever look that way. But the biggest thing for me is that this is going to take a lot of pressure off of Maxim. I can't ever say his name. What's the guy on the left side? Saint Maxim, is that his name?
Saint Maxim. Yeah, sorry, I talked about the French team.
Sorry, I always
yeah,
draw blank on that guy's name. But it's going to take pressure off of him. Because now you have a couple other threats, so then maybe they don't have to double up on certain sides or maybe focus on certain areas. There's a lot more threats on the field that you have to worry about. Plus, it gives Almiron a little bit of, or not even just Almiron, but it gives that front attacking area a little bit of a break and a little bit less pressure because there are more threats on the team. So I am pretty excited about that one. But we'll have to also mention, now we're going to go from the forwards to the back, and we'll start off with another goalkeeper. We have Mendy, rumored to be joining Chelsea, even after Frank Lampard has said that Kepa is the goalkeeper. Do you think this is going to be a flop or flourish for Mendy?
I think I lean a little bit of a flop just because it's kind of an awkward situation. I think the timing of it is peculiar to me because I was excited to see Frank take the stance of having confidence in Kepa. I'm not a huge Kepa fan, but I think it's important for a manager to have confidence in their goalkeeper. And what that said to me was they're rolling with Kepa for the season, and they're kind of done with their transfers. And here's the Chelsea squad. He's the guy at the back. And now all of a sudden, Mendy, all these rumors of him going into Chelsea is kind of the opposite of that, right? And I think actions speak louder than words. So, it kind of reduces the credibility of Frank Lampard a little bit for me, and I don't like that. I like Frank Lampard. But I think it's important to give Kepa competition as well, because there needs to be a little bit of extra motivation, a little extra kick from the back, so to speak, to get him to really perform up to his potential and at the best that he can, so that Frank can be confident in him and can turn those words into actions and back him up. Because if not, then Mendy's going to take that starting job and Kepa's going to be done.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know what the conversation was like between Mendy and Frank, just because I think it's just kind of an interesting scenario for Mendy for Chelsea, honestly. Chelsea to spend over 20 million euros on a player that is just going to be fighting for competition, especially in a goalkeeper position where he's already the starter at his current club in France. So I think one, from Chelsea perspective, that's kind of a weird thing for me too. And second, from the player's perspective, like, I wonder, did Frank set the tone with Mendy that, hey, you're going to have to fight for a spot against Kepa in this situation? Or is he's just backing up Kepa, but with the intention of starting Mendy? So I think that's a little bit of a kind of a weird situation for me to grasp with this one. I think that if you're going to spend 25 million or 24 million euros on a player of Mendy's quality just for him to sit the bench potentially, because you already broke the bank on your main keeper right now. Granted, he hasn't been in as great a form. So I have to think that's a flop too, because there is a chance that he won't play. And I mean, Kepa didn't look the best on their opening day. So I think that it could go either way. I just think it's an interesting scenario for a player to kind of come into that situation with the keeper position already under such scrutiny. So I would lean towards a flop, but I think it could flourish as well. Kepa hasn't been the greatest. I just think it's kind of weird.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to flourish, but I agree, flop.
Yeah. Sticking to Chelsea then, it seems like after they secure this deal for Mendy, they're going to be shifting their attention over to Declan Rice. Do you think Declan Rice going to Chelsea would be a flop or a flourish?
I don't know when they're going to stop, but I'm going to say flop. Most people probably say flourish on this, but I'm going to flop just because I'd rather see Rice stay at West Ham. The reason I say that is because he's the focal point at West Ham. He's the star. He's the main piece of their midfield, and he's going to come into a midfield at Chelsea that already has Conte and Kovacic, and depending on whether Jorginho stays or not, they just brought in Havertz. I think that midfield's pretty deep. And I know we talk about depth, but if you're Declan Rice, I think at his age and where he wants to be right now, getting on the field is very important. And he's been at Chelsea before. And I don't know. I think I would rather him stay at West Ham and continue to get playing time, continue to develop. And who knows, maybe be the guy that eventually stays at West Ham long term and brings them up a few steps in the Premier League, or goes to whether it be Chelsea in the future or someone else. I don't know. But I go flop just because you're not going to see much of him. I think that midfield is going to end up being Conte, Kovacic, and probably Havertz for most of the season.
You know, and Megan, the crazy thing is that you didn't even mention Jorginho in there, and Jorginho is like still a solid player to have back there, and he's probably better than Declan Rice to be fair as well. I think the difference is that Declan's a little bit younger. I think I'm going to go lean towards the flop on this one as well, but I do think that there are flourish aspects to this. I think if I were Chelsea should wait a year, just because West Ham aren't looking too pretty at this current moment, at least just based on their first game. And granted, we still have a long season to go, but as things are kind of trending right now, it's not looking like they're a team that are as well put together as some of the other ones, at least just on initial impressions. So I think that they would be able to get a pretty good deal for Declan Rice the following year, and he's going to get the playing time playing at West Ham. So I think that that's really good for him, and that he'll keep constantly develop. So I think from that essence, I would lean more towards a flop, just because I don't think the timing is right with the current players that they have. But if they were to offload someone like Jorginho, I do think that they need someone like Declan Rice to fit into that squad, because he provides a different element than Kovacic. Kovacic and Ross Barkley, for me, they like to push up a little bit, whereas Declan is perfectly fine being in a holding role. Just
Barkley's
like
another one too, and Barkley's another one I didn't even think about. That midfield's tough to get playing time in.
Yeah, and I think what Declan brings is that it's just a different element to the midfield, and that he's going to be he's solely going to be just a distributor, just like Conte is, and play that holding midfield role. And in a team where you already have so many attackers, I think that's the type of style midfielder that they're looking for. So I think he could flourish at that club. I think it's going to be really tough for him, just looking at the pecking order and looking at the quality that's already there. But I think that give him a year time, and I think that would be a pretty good flourish for me. All right, and then we'll end on this big one. It seems like this deal is confirmed pending a few moving parts with the domino effect, but it's looking like Memphis Depay, who was heavily linked to Dortmund about a month ago, is going to join Ronald Koeman over at Barca. Do you think this is going to be a flop or a flourish?
Oh man, I don't know. Before I give a definitive flop or flourish, I'm just going to kind of talk through this. I mean, I think Memphis Depay is such an interesting one because not very long ago, we all thought Sancho to United was a done deal, which was going to mean that Depay was going to go to Dortmund and replace him, and I was very excited over that. I thought that was going to be really fun to watch. However, now then after that week, we ended up moving and talking about Barcelona with the whole Messi situation and how rough it is there, and how, I was thinking as a player, I really wouldn't want to go there right now. And then fast forward, Koeman gets hired, and now every single Dutch player in the world is apparently trying to go to Barcelona. And I think it's pretty crazy. And Memphis Depay specifically is a guy who's been there before. He knows what the culture is like. And I think it's a little bit different now than where he was. But I think it's something that if you're Barcelona right now, I'll kind of approach it from their perspective. You have to bring players in that are going to perform right away and are going to make the fans happy, make Messi happy, and be competitive in a Champions League situation. And I think Memphis Depay proved that he could do that. I also think he's a very pivotal piece of Lyon's puzzle, but he's obviously not going to be there for very long. And Barcelona is an interesting fit. But having said all of that, I'm actually going to lean for a flop just because I think that he could fit in other teams a little bit better. I think that they've got to figure out what the heck they're going to do for a lineup. They've got guys like Dembele, Griezmann, Messi. We don't know what's going to happen with Suarez. They need to get an identity there. And I'm not sure that position is, in my opinion, their number one need. But I feel like it's more of a Koeman Dutch trying to bring in guys like him and Wijnaldum to just be in the puzzle for his plan. And I'm not really sure what that plan is yet. And so until I figure out what exactly he's doing over there, it's hard for me to say anything's going to flourish to a Barcelona standard.
Yeah, I think you put it nicely. I'm going to say this is a flat-out flop. I just don't think this makes sense in any way, shape, or form. I mean, they have the attacking players up top. They have depth in the winger positions as well. So I just have a hard time seeing where this deal makes sense. I mean, I guess he would be a pretty good backup to have behind Antoine Griezmann, or potentially give Griezmann competition to maybe spark some game left in him maybe. But I just don't see that. Their issues are in the back and their issues in the midfield. Frankie de Jong needs a little bit of support and another midfielder to help complement him so they can distribute the ball up to their attacking team. Ansu Fati has proved that he is a great player. He should be on the starting lineup, and he's earned a spot there. And I think that they should be giving him more playing time. And I think that with Depay coming in, I think he's going to play more of like a left winger type role, and Griezmann's going to play up top with Messi on the right side, and Dembele backing him up, and Fati behind him. But I think Fati is a good enough player that he could start, and then maybe look at another academy person below that could be his backup, or maybe get a cheaper option that wouldn't be as expensive to put on that left wing or so. But I just don't see where this piece fits. They need defenders. They need midfielders. I just don't think that this is the best deal. I think this is just Koeman using his Dutch background and bringing in another Dutch profile into the team. Yeah. But I don't think it's something that they absolutely need.
I think Wijnaldum makes a little bit more sense than Depay does for Barcelona.
I wholeheartedly agree.
And I think that move, the Wijnaldum one, causes a little bit more of a domino effect across the world. Simply because once, if that move goes through, then Liverpool gets money, then they can fund the Thiago move, and then Bayern can have the money to maybe extend Alaba. Like it just all of that makes sense and makes me happy. Whereas that's how I felt about Depay going to Dortmund, with Sancho going to United. Like all those things were what I felt like were supposed to happen, and none of that's actually happening. And I'm not happy about it, because I would have liked to see Sancho at United. I would have liked to see Depay at Dortmund. I would like to see Wijnaldum at Barca. But now all of a sudden we're talking about Depay going to Barca. Like, I've already seen that. I don't know what the identity is going to be. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me. And to be honest, if I'm him, if Lyon were to keep Aor and Depay, they're still a solid team too. They made it farther in the Champions League than Barcelona did. I know that's probably not a consistent thing, but you're still going to have your success there too. And I don't know. I don't really like it, but we'll see what happens.
And I'm gonna throw two more perspectives into this conversation. Another reason why I'm thinking it's a flop is that, Memphis Depay came to Manchester United at a time where they needed a player of his caliber. He didn't rise up to the occasion, and he was injured for a lot of that time too. So he already flopped in a system where United weren't in a good spot either. And he's going into that same exact type of environment at Barcelona, where everything's in shambles, probably more so than it was at Manchester United. More pressure is going to be on top of him as well. And I just don't see that working out. And I know that one thing I will say to Barcelona's credit in terms of them looking at Memphis is that Memphis did tell Leon that he was not going to extend his contract, and he does have 1 year left. So they do need to offload him in order to make some of that money back. True. So they are going to get a pretty good deal for him in terms of how much they're going to be spending versus the quality of talent that he is. But when you talk about a Barcelona team that they can't even make this deal happen without offloading players like Vidal, Suarez, any of those, or Umtiti, any one of those players, in order to make this deal happen. I just think that if you're going to offload that, you should probably bolster your defense or bolster a position that's well needed when you have pretty good attacking players. Maybe not from a depth perspective, but they have the players in order to do so. And I know that they were looking at players like Eric Garcia, for example, from Barcelona. That's another good, or from Manchester City. That's a good youth center back, that someone that you can kind of mold into the role while you're rebuilding. So I just think that money could go to use elsewhere, and I just don't see that this being an option that's going to make Barcelona that much better of a team or compete with Real Madrid for La Liga.
Yeah, I think so. So I'll give you one other perspective. I'll play a devil's advocate to what we've both been saying, and it's something that I just thought about. And I think, how do I want to frame this? So if you're Koeman, right? I think both you and I agree that he's probably going to be there short term, and I personally think Xavi is going to be their long-term manager at some point in time in the future. So Koeman, to me, is the intermediate step, and you and I have had that conversation. I know you agree with me there. But if you're Koeman, from his perspective, your goal is to come in and do whatever you need to do to basically keep your job. And if you know darn well that at the end of this season, if Messi has that June 10th clause in there, it's very likely he's not going to miss that deadline, and he may be leaving very soon, whether he stays or not. So you have two options. You need to either A, do everything you can to keep Messi, or B, prepare Barcelona for the era after Messi, which could be as soon as after next summer. So maybe in his eyes, bringing in a guy like Depay, and having some Dutch influence, and if he could get Wijnaldum too, maybe he's trying to write the next chapter for what happens after Messi, and he's trying to influence it in his own Dutch way. And Depay is definitely a capable player if he plays up to his potential. So that would be the only thing I can think of in terms of me and you trying to make sense out of this is maybe he's thinking in terms of Depay is a better long-term option for what happens when Messi leaves. I don't know. But I do still think that, like you said, there's Ansu Fati and other youth players there. I'm not sure that Depay is the perfect fit, but that's the only way that I can make sense out of it.
Yeah, and the only other thing that I'll point out that's kind of weird to me as well is that, when I'm talking about Memphis and where he could fit in with the squad, I'm mostly looking at the wings just because you have a 120 million euro player in Antoine Griezmann at striker. So I just find it very hard for Memphis to play striker. But Memphis has also been playing that center forward / striker role for Lyon, and he's been a striker for a couple of years now. So it's interesting to bring in a striker to play a winger role when recently his striking has been his main primary position. So
he's like the same position as Griezmann.
I just feel like there's more questions with this deal than there are answers for it. I do wish Memphis the best.
We've been asking questions the whole time.
I was excited for Memphis when he joined United. I had high hopes for him. It didn't end up working out. I hope he's able to find his place in Barcelona. But from his perspective, I mean, he's getting up there in age. He's getting in his later 20s and approaching his 30s. So he's definitely looking to make a big move and thrive at a big club. So all in all, if his deal ends up going through for him, I wish him the best, and I hope that he's able to prove all of us wrong. I just don't see these pieces working together, but only time will tell, at least in this next year that Koeman has. But anyway, that ends our Flop or Flourish segment. I believe we were pretty negative on this Flop or Flourish this time.
Yeah, we were.
But typically we're more positive, so, I think it's only right that sometimes we get some negative. But that's it for today's podcast. Again, make sure you guys follow us on all of our social medias, Spotify, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And be sure to subscribe and like us so you are not missing a thing. Tyler, always a pleasure, my friend, and everyone have a good week.
Have a good one, guys.